Welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. And I'm joined for the first time, decided it's time to have a guest on, and it's time to have somebody on who knows a thing or two about Philly sports and about Philly sports radio. And I bring to all of you right now, you've seen him on his own channel. You've seen him on Out of the Park with Jon Marks. Jon Marks, welcome to the Russ Joy Show. Big, roaring round of applause.
Out of the Parks. Bet Parks.
Sorry, Out of the Parks, Bet Parks. Yeah.
Play up,
do you want me to re-rack this? Should we re-rack it? I can.
Not necessarily.
I can.
Okay. I didn't know I was your first guest. I have tuned in because you are you're live in the morning, so it just depends on the morning routine. But I will tune in, and you know I'm a big fan, so I'm honored to be on the program. I want to know how you have 4 children and yet you still have an area to do the show, which is a very cool looking setup. And I am banned in the basement. If I didn't have this fake thing behind me, you'd see these walls, and if you looked around in my basement, you'd see nothing but kids shit everywhere and my wife's crap. So congratulations that you actually have your own area. I have nothing.
I appreciate it. Well, we did the basement last year. The basement was done, but the first homeowner was a contractor. We use this term loosely, and so we had to kind of redo some things. So I have an office down here, which is great, and I used to have my hex tiles. They're on the other walls to try to kill the live sound in here. But yes, this is the dojo, and then out there's all kinds of other stuff in the basement. That's the kid area. Although we did set up kind of like the home theater setup. So it's perfection. It's fantastic out there, but their stuff stays out there. There's a nice little closet for them to keep everything nice and orderly, but there's, you know how it is. You've got 3, I've got 4. The two of us, not together, but the two of us have created 7 kids. That's a lot. That's a lot of small humans. That's a lot of toys. That's a lot of stuff all over the place.
So if we got married, which we can do now because, it's 2024. If we were to get married, we'd be like the modern day Brady Bunch, except we'd have one more than...
We'd actually, but we'd have no Alice. Do you know somebody who could be our Alice? Because if you do, by all means, I saw you just celebrated, was it your 10th anniversary?
10th anniversary, yes.
We just did as well last weekend. So we're on the same, look at this,
really?
We're living very similar life trajectories, We're
wow.
All these kids, 10-year anniversary, good on us. Hey, you know what?
I do not have Ann B. Davis's number. I just looked for it, but
okay. Well, we
would have to do something else.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, and this is one of these. It's one of these things where things have been changing. They've been changing rapidly, and I've talked to you on Crossing Broadcasts a few times now. We've kind of gone back and forth a bunch, just about radio, about what's going on in the Philly sports media landscape, and then you landed at Bet Park. So before we get into everything, give people an idea of where they can find the show, what you're doing there. What's on the horizon. We'll get to some of that stuff, but let people know about the show.
Yeah, so it's a baseball show. It's a Phillies show every Wednesday. We do it live, and then if it's a later game, we'll rerun it before the game. But it's on YouTube. It's on Bet Park's YouTube. It's on my YouTube. It's on our Twitter. I paid the extra money so I could stream it on Twitter because a lot of people watch on Twitter. Elon Musk got me, and it's Maniac Malloy, Pat Malloy. And Sam Stafford, who you know from her days at 97.5 The Fanatic and Channel 29, and she does Phillies Nation, I guess, the TV show or
on TV, yeah.
Yeah, so she's a big Phillies girl, and it's a weekly Phillies podcast, weekly Phillies show, and it's been a great season. Now we're starting to kind of hit some of the rocky parts of the season, which we knew was coming, but yeah, it's fun. It's fun to after being on the radio for so many years and working with Mike, actually, and we'll talk about Mike Miss in a little bit, but working with Mike through the first run of the Phillies from winning the World Series in 2008, going back in 2009, and through that run, and then they were bad for a long time, to be good again and to be able to follow it. I mean, I was at the World Series 2 years ago with Ike and Jack. We were back in Arizona last year for the NLCS, which lost, so it would have been missing if I didn't have some type of outlet to talk about the Phillies this summer. So I'm very happy to be doing this with Parks. It's been a lot of fun.
I actually want to get into a little bit of that transition really quick too, because I find I'm more locked in on, I think, what happens in the Philly media landscape just as much as the teams, but I find everything interesting. I find the transitions interesting. A lot of guys who get out of radio that have gone off to start their own shows, their own podcasts. It's been a real mixed bag. We'll talk about Mike in a second, but Mike was one of the ones, I think he does the show at Bet Rivers, right?
Yeah.
Where he went from doing afternoon drive, was kind of unceremoniously dumped at 97.5. They didn't come to an agreement. It was just like 10 minutes left on the radio. I think it was when he kind of said, this is my last show. We didn't work anything out. And people were like, what the hell is going on? He went off and did that. Gargano, I've talked about on this show and on Crossing Broadcast, like goes off, is really the guy who they used as the local guy to build the team over at PHLY. He's had mixed results just in terms of, streaming is hard. It's a different medium. No one actually knows what the podcast feed looks like. I mean, you can kind of get a general idea if you monitor some of the sports charts on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but it's hard for a regional show to make it up there unless you're niche. If you're Snow the Goalie, you can be in the top 5 of national hockey podcasts because it's a niche sport. It's harder, I think, for a general audience. So you went from doing afternoon drive at WIP, you had been at the Fanatic, you had done mornings there, you'd done middays there. I want to pick your brain here for a second. You've now kind of done every time slot there was to do on terrestrial radio. What did you like the best? Let's start with the timing. Take all the co-hosts out of it, just from a lifestyle perspective. Did you like doing the mornings, the middays, or the afternoons the most?
Yeah, and I worked nights too. I worked nights at the Fanatic after I stopped working with Mike Miss, and that was just a couple of months. And then I got moved to middays. And then at WIP, I started at nights, and then I got moved to work with Ike within it was like 6 months, 8 months, or something like that. But I think it's a two-part question, because the pace of the show is different for every day part, right? Like, so morning drive, you're on the air for 4 hours. You're not coming out with your fastball at 6 a.m., right? Because that's when the least amount of people are listening. So the pace of the show is different with the different day part. By 7 o'clock in the morning, now you're kind of like, all right, let's get into really like what's the big story of the day, and let's like put our best stuff 7 o'clock hour, 8 o'clock hour. By 9 o'clock, and by the way, all these things have changed too because of driving habits and work habits and working from home. So the typical, you get in your car at 8 o'clock, you get to work at 9, you get in the car at 5 o'clock, you get home at 6 o'clock, doesn't exist anymore. No. Most people are on the roads now listening to the radio in the 2 and 3 o'clock hour. But like, as far as timing, it's easy. It's the mornings. I'm up early. I love the fact that I can be working when others are sleeping, and then by 11 o'clock in the morning, I can go home and do whatever I want to do. And I mean, really, like, it's a different show than some of the other shows. You can do a lot more non-sports in the morning than you would in the afternoon. So that would be, as far as timing and where I would want to work, it would definitely be mornings. As far as paces of show, afternoon drives are really good, because you can come out at 2 o'clock and you can throw your fastball and boom, you just leave it there. And then you can kind of reset and put a new topic into play or whatever else. But that's what I'm most familiar with. I worked 4 years afternoon drive with Mike Miss, and I worked 7 with Ike. And then in between the middays, it's kind of like a more, I don't want to say leisurely pace, but people are at work listening. Yeah. You have people that are driving. So you have salespeople, people that drive for a living and everything else. So it's kind of like a little bit of a different, you can't see my hand because of the whatever, but it's not like boom, come out and throw your fastball. It's just kind of, you're a companion for people while they're at work or they're doing whatever else. So, I mean, I wanted to work mornings for a lot of different reasons. And so if I had to choose, that's where I would be. I'd be mornings. And you did
have a run doing mornings. I do remember those days, you and Gargano and
18 months,
company.
Worked 18 months with Anthony. Before that, from 2006 until 2008, I worked mornings when it was the old 950. Before it was 950 ESPN, when Mike joined in April of 2008, it was Sports Radio. No, it was Sports Talk 950, which turned into Sports Radio 950. We had a local morning show that was Michael Bradley, Glenn Foley, Meredith Morakovitz. If people remember Meredith, now she's up in New York doing stuff for Yes and the Yankees. So yeah, so I did 2 years of that. But yeah, I mean, it's not my largest sample is afternoon drive doing sports radio.
It is interesting. Like now, I don't know how much you've done listening. Like I know that a lot of times you're in a profession, you kind of in your case kind of chose to walk away from doing this massively successful show, the number one show in its time slot by a significant margin. And then, like, you decided kids are getting older, all that kind of stuff. Also, that commute sucks just in general. I would say that, like, afternoon commute, because you and I live very close to each other, that commute, whether it's going to 97.5 in Ballackinwood or it's going to where the WIP studios, that commute sucks. I cannot imagine having to do that every day. I'm pissed off enough when I go down to do 41 Flyers games to do pregame and postgame and everything. That drives me nuts on its own because, as you know, a half hour is the difference between an hour added onto your commute or being able to get down there in a pretty decent hour. So I get that. The mornings are interesting. I know somebody who actually does work, not in Philly sports radio, but just in Philly radio, who does a morning show. And to know exactly what that schedule looks like and how complicated that can be with, especially like you think on the sports side of things, you can't really watch the game live. Because if you do like 3 a.m. wake up on the road by 4 or so, depending, right? Like that, I have to imagine, like, while that might be the one that you kind of like the most, that can't be easy, right? Like, how the hell do you catch up on the game? Is it really like you get into the studio, you're kind of like going through the highlights, you're kind of DVRing? Like, what is the protocol?
Yeah,
so that you can sound informed. You don't want to sound like a jackass who like didn't see any of it. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, you can't. I know Angelo used to tape all of the games. I think he was asleep at like 7 o'clock at night. So he didn't watch any of the games live, but he taped them. So think about it. Now with technology, we're able to watch. You can go watch a YouTube highlight of the Phillies that shows every out from the game. Yep. So with baseball and like with all sports, I mean, there's something that you need to watch the game. I like listening to the analysis. I like listening to everything that happens during a game. So it's tough to really get a feel for the game by doing that. But you can certainly know what happened in a game between reading, between checking out social media for highlights, and just going like, I'll if I don't catch a whole Phillies game, I'll watch the YouTube and it'll show every highlight. But when I worked mornings, I would typically try to go to bed at 9 o'clock. I'd get up at 2:30. Because my youngest was just a baby. So I'd feed her, put her back to bed. I was in the studio by 3:30. And then from there, I DVR'd SportsCenter. I DVR'd the whatever Comcast Sports Rise, whatever it was
Sports
then.
Rise, yeah, at the time, yeah.
Because you can get good sound bites from games. You get a much more local angle to highlights from our teams than if you catch something on SportsCenter. But SportsCenter also has good national stuff as well. And you're able to fast forward through DVR stuff. Like that Sports Rise is really like 13 minutes worth of content. Because at the end, it used to be like the play of the day or some crap. So it'd be two segments that you could easily breeze through.
And then you would always catch it. Like that was always the thing. Like when you would wake up for like, and in my case, I'd wake up for school and it'd be like Ron Burke in the morning. Right. I would always catch the last 6 minutes of the prior hours, the prior half hour show where you would like kind of catch the Broderick Bunkley interview, right? Like the little soundbite from training camp. And then you get the Pico Power Play of the day. And then it would kind of flip back around and then you'd watch the missing 24 minutes in your mind. Right. And then you kind of have to finish it to completion. But I actually kind of miss those days. Like it doesn't really exist the same way anymore. Like
a much simpler time, Russ.
It was
simpler time.
It sure was.
They bury 2 commercial breaks late with like a minute worth of content. So you're stuck watching 6 minutes of commercial for 1 minute worth of content. But yeah, so I mean, like you have to. It's because you're not watching it live necessarily. Now you do have the option to stay up and watch the games. If they're big games, you're obviously watching them. But I mean, I don't know what the camera does. I don't know if John Kincaid and Andrew Shalchunas, if they're watching the games live. I mean, you could watch and go to sleep. The baseball games are over by 9 o'clock now anyway, for the most part. Yeah. But it's definitely a much different grind. But I know guys that do morning sports radio around the country, and they're not watching the games the night before. They probably don't watch any of it. So I
kind of feel like you can it sort of feels like you can get away. Like the morning, I feel like more than any other time, you can sort of get away with having other stuff mixed into the show where it's a lot more entertainment based. And if you catch the last inning, you watch Jose Alvarado blow a save earlier in the season. That's all you need. You don't care about the prior 8 innings, right? Because that's the talking point. That's what you go in, and then you mix in some giveaways, you mix in some calls, everything's fine. Last thing on the radio thing, because I'm until we get to the actual new programming stuff. Where did you land on calls? Because I know that they are part of the fabric of Philly sports talk radio, but not necessarily across the country. Like you would have some guys and ladies that you would go out to on the phones and they might call every day. They might call every show every day. Where did you land on it? Did you like hearing the same person call in, for morning, midday, afternoon? Did it piss you off? Where you're like, yo, let's just limit this guy to like 1 call a week, 2 calls a week. Where were you on it? Or did you feel like they really were a fabric of the show?
Yeah, I don't, and I will just self-proclaim myself as listening to the most sports radio of anybody that's ever been in this city across the country. I listen to so much radio in general. It's something that I've said going forward I have to cut down on because I should be watching more shows or doing other things other than listening to audio. But I listen to a lot of sports radio, just sampling stuff. I don't continue to listen to shows that they suck, but you find shows across the country that's like, wow, like that's a really good show. Like for instance, in the afternoon, there's a show. It's Money Matt Smith and Petro, who went to USC and was a football player there, and they're an AM station, 570 AM. They do afternoon drive in Los Angeles, so I could catch them on my way home. Okay. Totally different than anything you've ever heard. No callers, nothing like that. They don't even get a phone. I don't know if they have a phone number, right? Like text line stuff or whatever. So depending on where you are, Northeast does a lot more phone calls than anywhere else in the country. As far as the phone calls, the one thing I would say that I didn't like about what we did and what I've pretty much always done is coming out and having some topic and having them be like, oh, well, Phillies suck. What do you mean? No, the Phillies don't suck. The Phillies are great. Oh, well, 215-592-9494. Do you think the Phillies are great? Do you think the Phillies are suck, right?
Yeah.
I like phone calls for entertainment, and I like phone calls to help with a topic. The tough part is that to get phone calls, you need to like put something out there like that to where people are going to want to talk about it. So It's like every day, well, what are we reheating today? Jalen Hurts, can they win a Super Bowl with him? Should they have fired Nick Sirianni? Right? Like a lot of times there's an obvious topic and it's easy. On the other 70% of the days, it's not easy and you have to constantly do that. So when you rely on phone calls, now you're relying on having to do that. But I grew up listening to Howard Stern, that kind of era of radio, and everybody will say, or a lot of people will say, oh, Howard Stern does the best interviews and this and that. My favorite part of Howard Stern was the Whack Pack. And was his callers and the phone calls and kind of the audience that he created. And they really became a huge part of the show. And that's what I always wanted to do. And when we started Marks and Reese, that was the goal, which was I want to start my own Whack Pack that calls into the show. And we really, really did that. I felt like Angelo had that same kind of thing going on with his callers, except our callers were much better. We had a much different audience than what Angelo had in the mornings. So that's kind of how I always looked at when John Kincaid came to Philly, he did a lot of talking about like, we're not taking phone calls.
Yeah, we're not doing,
phone calls. And it's like, first of all, just don't take phone calls. You don't have to announce it and constantly talk about how you're not going to take phone calls. It's all about how you use them, right? It's all about how you use them. So I can understand not wanting to just take phone call after phone call after phone call, Mike Francesa style. Like, I don't want to do that. But to try to make people think, whoa.
He's gone. He's gone. The people who are listening in the podcast feed, if you're wondering, John just fell off the screen. He just died. It was very sad.
But anyway, yeah. So just like I like phone calls, but I can understand how people get tired of them.
It's weird though, like I don't. When I did a very brief stint on 610, when we were doing like crossing broadcast there and Snow the Goalie there, we would get a few people who would check in all the time, right? But they were a lot of the same people who would join us on like a live stream when we do pregame or whatever. And it's funny because even with the Crossing Broad show, you'll have a few people who are in the comment section there that don't follow. Like they live in that one little ecosystem. Right. And then I've now had a few of them that have like migrated over here. So when we do the show live, there are some people who like very much feel like they are essential to the success of the show, or they feel like they are essential to it. And it's funny because I think it was right after you left and Jack kind of took more of a co-hosty sort of role with Ike. I think it was Chuck from Mount Airy was the one who like went on and he motherfucked Jack on the air. Crazy. And we're like, oh my God. But it seemed like his contention was like, I'm part of the show. I, the caller, am part of the show. Like I am very responsible for the success of the show, which is silly. But like you are in some way, if you keep going back to those people, they do probably feel a little bit more like they're part of it. Like on the streaming front, there are people that I'll go to all the time that'll be in this comment section, be over on Snow the Gold. And like, I'll go to those people a lot because a lot of times they offer a lot of substance and stuff that you can kind of build off of. And the people who just like write a bunch of dumb shit in the comments, like, I don't go to them that much because it's like But I have that ability, right? Like I can screen that. The producer who's screening the calls, you're talking about, is Jalen Hurts, in a true hate relationship with Nick Sirianni? The person can call up and say, oh yeah, I'll talk about it. But then they get on and they say, well, yeah, before I get to that, I have a Sixers point. I want to talk about Joel Embiid being a loser. Right. And you're like, well, that's a real curveball. Did you, like, when you would get those kind of curveballs, did you enjoy them? Was it a thing where you're like, all right, I see what you're doing there. And like, you're on your toes instead of being in rhythm on the topic. Did it bother you at all? Or were you like, no, it's fun?
Yeah, no, it's annoying. It's completely annoying when someone decides that they're going to do that. And that's very, a lot of times what they do is they'll complain. They're not going to call in and be like, oh, by the way, because if they actually say, hey, I wanted to ask you about this before I get to it, I'm not going to care about that. It's the people, a lot of times Flyers fans, that are mad that you're not talking about their sport.
Yeah.
So then I would always counter and I'd be like, okay, well, what do you want to say about it? Oh, well, I all you do is talk about the Eagles. I mean, you should talk about the Flyers. And I'm like, okay, sure, let's talk about the Flyers. What would you like to say? Well, I'm just saying that you have to cover all the. I'm like, right, I know, I understand what you're saying. So what do you want to say about the Flyers? And they have nothing to say about the Flyers. 99.99% of the time when I got that caller, they never had anything to say about the Flyers. Or whatever sport. I'm not just trying to single out the Flyers. But it's that, like, they never do. They're just complaining because they hear it. And believe me, I understand that hearing the Eagles, like 12 months a year, pretty much all the time, when there's not something that's pertinent in Philly sports, you fall back on the Eagles. But really, when you look at the national media, whether you're looking at national radio, Colin Cowherd, any of the debate shows, what is 75 to 80% of their content? It's the NFL.
It's NFL, yeah.
Free agency, draft, season, or whatever. So what we're not doing anything differently than the playbook that is national. The national playbook is you play the hits, and the hits are the NBA, especially when it comes playoff time, LeBron James, the NFL, Dallas Cowboys, etc. And that's what we did. And with the Eagles here, I think because people are so crazy, you're able to do it another 10% of the time than maybe in other cities.
I feel like Lebitard's show, like Lebitard is the one that I'll listen to out of market, or I'll watch on YouTube. I'll have it in the background. And like, I think they do a pretty good job of kind of balancing it a bit, but I usually watch during the local hours. So they skew a little bit more Heat. They'll skew a little bit more Panthers and stuff, but like, I enjoy the balance. Good balance. You worked at WIP. Obviously, I said before, in a time where the ratings were just through the roof. The afternoon, I mean, it was a bloodbath. No matter how people feel about the post-Jon Marks era on that show, from what I've seen, from some of the numbers that I've seen from this past ratings book, they have continued to have a significant lead there.
Yep.
I keep coming back to the idea, and I don't want to put you in a weird spot here. So if I do, you can just tell me it's a weird spot, and you plead the fifth. WIP to me doesn't have to change the formula, right? Like, you can do Eagles every day because you're so far ahead. When the Phillies are a big topic, like, you can pivot to the Phillies and still have the Eagles kind of on the side burner. There's no reason really for you to talk about the Sixers or talk about the Flyers, talk about the Union, to talk about national topics, right? Like, the formula works. The people are checking in over the air and on the app. It's pretty simple. But I always come back to like the Fanatic, right? Like, I just sit back as somebody who's just like, most of the time, I'm like, I have no idea what the fuck they're doing. And a lot of the times it's because I've come back to this a lot of times. They never had a farm system in place. They had the AM station. They had the 610 station, right? Where they could have cultivated like that next group. They could have had the producers down, kind of doing the shows, getting the reps as a host, right? You could have potentially reached out to podcasters, had them come in, do some time on the air. Maybe you're kind of like building a farm system that, like, when a Mike Missanelli leaves, you can't come to terms, you have somebody to fill in. When an Anthony Gargano up and leaves, you have somebody. They didn't do that. And what I see now, you brought up Kincaid, saying the whole thing about like, we're not going to take calls, all that shit. They do, for the most part, the same thing that WIP is doing. And I always come back to, if you're getting your teeth kicked in every time slot, right? Like, if that just continues to be a thing, why are you trying to be a light version of the thing that works? If ratings book after ratings book, it shows, no, like, your hosts are either not dynamic enough, good enough, whatever, or engaging enough to have people turn the dial to download the other app. Like, why do the same thing now that you're not in it the same way? Like, do you see the same thing I do? Or is it just kind of like, if you're 97.5, you just kind of have to hold out hope that maybe they're going to hate the hosts at WIP at some point and change to the station and not listen to podcasts? Like, where do you land on it?
Yeah,
If you had to give them advice, like where do you land?
I heard I'm a watcher of Crossing broadcasts as well, so I've heard you and Kevin talk about this multiple times. Like why doesn't WIP or why doesn't the Fanatic counter program more?
Yeah.
Right? Talk more Sixers. Talk more Fly. Like why are you trying to compete with WIP, which owns the Eagles market? Why would you do that? And I've actually heard internally from people at the Fanatic that there's some people at the Fanatic that are saying we shouldn't even really talk about the Eagles or the Phillies. Let's just talk about the Sixers or the Flyers. So, and I'm going to try to be nice about this.
And it's tricky. I will give them this out while you're trying to figure out how to put this in a very nice way. It's not to not talk about the Eagles or the Phillies. It's to be willing to mix in the other teams, right? Like, because just to be clear to the people who like might listen or watch the show and say like, how the hell do you expect to like compete with Eagles talk by talking about the Sixers who aren't playing right now? It's more of like, take a more 4-for-4 mentality or even, whatever. All right. So go ahead. Now I tried to buy you a little bit of time there to be nice. Go ahead.
This has little to do with talking about Eagles too much or not talking about the Eagles enough or whatever. You just need to be more compelling and have a better show. I know that might sound simple. It's true. Right? Like Mike Missanelli came to the Fanatic, or then 9:50 a.m. in April 2008. The station had never even come close to competing with anything. No one even knew the station existed before Mike had come. And to this day, in 2024, no show has beaten a WIP show outside of Mike. Mike is the only person that has ever won a book. No other day part has ever won. Think about that. That's a long time. And Mike is the only host that won and owned their time slot until Ike and I took it away from him. But just saying that. But so anyway,
you want to say that again? You want to do a little?
The idea that you're going to talk Sixers and Flyers and that's going to be okay, you're going to get your ass kicked even worse. Like don't ignore the Eagles because WIP owns the Eagles. Do it better than them.
Yeah. Right.
Like you can't have Nick Sirianni on because Joe and Jon and the morning show has them on every week. So make fun of Nick Sirianni during that time. You got to be creative. You got to put out better content. If they're going to do a straight, the Eagles suck. If they're going to be like really, really serious about it, I think there's a lot of people out there that are listening to one of the two stations and don't really like the shows, but it's kind of like one is better than the other. That's what I hear from a lot of people. It's like, well, I can't listen to the Fanatic, so I listen to this and I don't really like him or whatever. I think that there's something out there that isn't being given by whether it's a radio show, whether it's a digital show, no matter what it is. And like, I think it's still out there and you can get it. The answer isn't to, well, we're a weak version of WIP, because you're right, Russ, that's what they're doing. Yeah. They're just more or less doing WIP, and Scott Masteller came in as the new program director of the Fanatic, and he got them very structurally sound, and he said, you got to talk more Eagles, you got to talk more Eagles. That's the move he should have made. But how you win and how you're successful is you need dynamic personalities, and you need to develop them. Yep. And that's where they've struggled along the way, as they haven't, like you had said at the start, they haven't developed younger guys that have stepped up and become that next wave of sports radio personalities.
Yeah, it's weird because like I don't have an affinity for a lot of these people. I feel like, I've met a decent number of people that it's like whatever. Have a chat from time to time, give feedback, get feedback, all that. There aren't that many people that are that engaging or that interesting. That's why, like, I always come back to, like, there are digital content creators right now. There are podcasters who are very good, very dynamic, who like would probably be better in some ways, or you could maybe break the mold. If you're the Fanatic, like, why do you feel the need to have the 3 day time, like the 3 day parts, right? I don't count the nights, because to me, like, the nights you're listening to a game or you're probably not, right? So like, if you're looking at the 3, why have the need to say, like, yes, we're going to do a 4-hour morning show or a 4-hour midday show, a 4-hour, like, why do that when you could say we're going to do 2 and 2 and we're going to have like an Eagles specific show, we're going to have a whatever specific show, or like we're going to have Sixers talk during this 1 hour somewhere in the middle of the day, whatever, like, mix it up, like, make it interesting, like, try to go after something, try to do something that's significantly different. They don't do it. It's honestly like kind of wild to me. Like, they've gone through as many program directors as they have, but they keep doing the WIP Light thing. And like, I can honestly say, like, all right, the afternoon show, it sucks. The afternoon, like 97.5's afternoon show is not good. It's not. It hasn't been good in a long time. It hasn't really been good since Mike was there. But I would even say that like the last year and a half of Mike being there, he almost felt like he was being held against his will. He seemed bitter. He like, honestly, he just kind of seemed like a guy who was kind of over it, was kind of going through the motions, wasn't winning in the ratings book. And like, it had kind of fallen off. Clearly there was something there. I think it's probably safe to say between he and Joe Bell, right? Like Joe Bell kind of gets pulled off the stage, is let go. Within a month, Mike Missanelli's back on the air, which I want to talk about here in a second. But like, that afternoon show stinks. I have no idea why they feel the need to like have that thing stay together. I've in seeing some of the ratings and seeing some of this past book, they gained a little bit. But it's not like they've blown the doors off. It's not like they've started to see a meteoric rise and there's a real reason to stick with it. The morning show's not very good either. I think Salchunas is fine. I don't think he's a lead guy. He's okay. I don't get Kincaid. I don't understand it. Don't understand what they're doing. I also don't like WIP's morning show, which I think some people have said is like a controversial take. To me, Angelo was what he was. But like there's a certain entertainment factor that I just don't get from that show. I certainly don't get it from 97.5 show. So I'm like, can somebody please just do a fun, goofy, I don't care if it's carnival, right? Like people would say Cataldi was a carnival barker. It was still like, if it was your cup of tea, it was a good thing. If you were looking to be entertained, it was hard to turn on that show and not walk away like feeling entertained. I don't listen to either of these morning shows now because anytime I do, I'm just like, it feels like miscast. Like I think that, maybe I'm crazy. I think Giglio and Hugh Douglas would do a better morning show than DeCamera and Richie. I actually think that they're miscast. But maybe I'm nuts, John. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just crazy and maybe I'm just like too hard to program for and it ain't all about me. But I feel like there's a way to kind of make these things a little bit better, a little bit more interesting.
And Big Q was in Atlanta doing morning, so I could see maybe why you would say that. Like Joe and John and James, they're actually better than Angelo. I think they're rating better than Angelo was. So all this talk
year over year, the ratings are up.
Yeah. And I know why, because there was a segment of the audience that were like, I'm not listening to Angelo anymore. Yeah. And Joe and John, and it may be a show for you, it may not be a show for you, right? Like I don't listen to a lot of Philadelphia sports radio. I think Joe's very good. He executes well. I like John. I like James. But like you had said, see the way. And
to be clear, it's not that I think it's a bad show. Their show, I don't think is bad. It's just not for me for a morning show.
Right. I agree.
It's not what I would expect or want to hear in the morning. But it's not a bad show. I think Kincaid's bad. I don't think that show's good. But I can say that. It's my show. What the fuck do I care? But like, anyway, go ahead.
No, and John's a pro. I think he's more of a midday host. I think Andrew Salchunas is very good. It's just like. So there's a station up in Boston, 98.5 The Sports Hub. It used to be owned by Odyssey or Entercom before that. But because there's another Entercom/Odyssey station in Boston, the FCC made them sell one of them. And they made a huge mistake of selling the Sports Hub because that's the nation's #1 sports radio station across all day parts. Their numbers are unbelievable. But in 2009, they actually celebrated their 15 years. It's their 15-year anniversary this week. But when they launched, when they went mornings, and they were going up against WEEI, which was like the WIP at the time. It was on AM.
Yeah.
So Sports Hub goes on FM, and WEEI was kind of the grumpy WIP. It's the same thing. Angelo at that time on 610 was grumpy, and people didn't like him. And Howard, people hated Howard at the time. So you get an FM sports station come in, and they have some success. But this station, they went outside of sports, and they got 2 rock DJs that had no sports background, and they started a morning show, and that's what they did. And I've always believed this: the best sports radio hosts, whether you're talking about mostly locally, because nationally it's a little bit different, but they're guys that are sports fans that can do sports. But like for me, I could easily do 4 hours and not talk about sports. I don't need to talk about sports. Now I do because that's the station, and I love sports. I like talking about sports, but you need people that are entertaining more than they're sports nerds. I'll go Tony Bruno. Tony Bruno, sports fan, entertaining radio guy. It's why Tony's one of my favorites. So that's what I see. You need to reinvent what the Fanatic is. The problem with what the Fanatic is doing is they're just more or less trying to remain profitable because they're making money. So they're trying to increase the ratings and increase revenue and get a little bit more buzz. But they're not going to make any real dent into what WIP is doing. If you reinvent yourself and you say, listen, fuck this, we're going after them. We're going to mock what they do. We're going to mock all these different shows where they're making up these things. Like, be aggressive. They're so worried about, like, oh, well, no, like, screw WIP. Go after them a little bit.
And it's funny, too, because Missanelli, and we can get to this part now, Missanelli goes back on the air on Monday. One of the first things he does in the first 5 minutes is take a shot at WIP. He says there won't be any unwanted kisses. And that includes for Bill and Ray, his producers, right? Producer/co-host, right?
Right.
And you're like, there it is. There's your viral moment. Crossing Broad takes it. They clip it. Becomes a whole big thing. Then, and by the way, if you Googled at any point, Google me. If you Googled at any point in the last few days, or in the last 36 hours or so, Mike Missanelli, every story is about him taking a shot at Howard Eskin.
Yep.
That's how you get yourself back in the mix. And it's funny because before that happened, right, the Howard Eskin thing's going around, right? WIP is not addressing it. Howard goes on, he kind of like does this, tiptoe sort of thing when he comes back to the air.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry that this happened or that it was, brought publicly, whatever. It was a weird thing. I didn't think it really did anything good for him or the station or making things better there, whatever. Nobody at the Fanatic, nobody for the 10-day cycle from the time that it was reported until he finally got back on it. It was actually longer than 10 days. I think he was off the air for 2 weeks on the weekend. Nobody said anything. Nothing. There's no shots. There's no like attempt to create a little bit of controversy. Here we only kiss the people who want to be kissed. Like, how does nobody do anything? How does nobody make a remark about it? How does nobody make an offhand comment about it? Nothing. Again, it's like they live in this like weird little void. They live in their own little echo chamber. There's
don't
nothing
talk about the
wrong.
other station. Don't act like they're alive. Yeah, no, I know.
I do this whole thing, right? Like, because I was a really big pro wrestling fan as a kid. I've come back around to it. Like, I live in this weird, headspace. If you're the leader by a lot, you have no reason to talk about the other station. If you're WIP and you're blowing out the competition, you have no reason to talk about the Fanatic. But if you're the Fanatic, why would you not take your shots, have your moment, like you said, do a little bit of controversy?
I punch up.
Mock
down.
what they're doing. Like, mock what they're doing. Have fun with it. How is there nobody at the Fanatic right now who's doing counter programming, counter tweeting to Elliott Shore Parks, monitoring how many passes in a row Jalen Hurts had thrown without an interception? How does that not come to anybody's mind? How is there not like a fake 97.5 reporter putting out random bullshit tweets that are very clearly meant to be a parody, but like following stupid stuff? Will Shipley rush to the left? He's now done 36 straight rushes to the left, which is not a true stat, right? But like, do something with it. Have fun, right? Yeah, whatever.
No vision, Russ Joy.
It's a shame. Right. It's a shame.
For example, I was texting with somebody after Kyle Neubeck had his comments about Howard, if you remember. Yeah. Right? Yep. And I said, there's a 0% chance anybody in the Philly media discusses this at all. Because PHLY is not going to want to bring it up because it happened with them and it sounded bad. WIP's not going to bring it up, and the Fanatic's not going to bring it up. Like the Elliott stuff. Let me give you an example. With Elliott, it's a tough spot for the town at WIP, because if Elliott doesn't want to talk about it, I'm not going to ask him about it, right? Like, I'm not going to come out and give the phone number and be like, so what do you think Elliott should do, right? Because I'm going to respect if Elliott doesn't want to talk about it or whatever. No, I think he should.
You're talking about the Deshaun thing. You're talking about the Deshaun thing about like that the piece from years ago,
right? But the Fanatic should talk.
Deshaun puts out the quote where he talks about kind of trashing his life, all that, his reputation. Yeah.
Why is the Fanatic not talking about that and fanning the fucking flames?
Yeah.
No one else is talking about it, but everybody's talking about it, right? Like.
Yep.
And you can even defend Elliott and say, you know what? Like, remember Deshaun with the jackpot without a CK because that's Crip Killer and all the other stuff that was going up for him. Like, talk about Howard. Play the freaking Kyle Neubeck cut and bleep out what you can't play on the radio. Talk about stuff that people don't think you're going to talk about. It. Josh Ennis beat Mike Missanelli for 11 months. He came into town. He called his shot. He beat Mike Missanelli for 11 months, and then he flamed out. You know why? Because it was different than anything anybody had ever done on sports radio, and it was fun. And I wasn't working against him, but nobody was safe from his nonsense, Ennis. And like it worked, but then there had to be more plays than just that one play, and he just self-destructed, like he has in a lot of different places.
I've never gotten anybody to confirm what happened, but I'm 99% sure what happened between him and Bruno was because of a late night tweet. I don't even know if you know about this. Maybe you do. There was a late night tweet where he put something out about like if I had hired my Jilly was his wife, I think. If I had hired her to be my producer, something. He put this like late night tweet out, which was like clearly a shot at Bruno and Robin, and that's when Bruno and Ennis were doing the show. The next day, Bruno wasn't on the air, and I remember like sending it to Crossing Broad at the time and being like, guys, something's up here. This tweet's deleted. There's the thing. Bruno's not on the air. Bruno walks away, and I was like, man. But they had a good show going. Their show almost played like a morning show in the afternoon because Bruno's Bruno. He's entertaining. Ennis was doing all this stuff. He was taking shots at Missanelli. Like, yeah, they should run that play. Okay, let's play this one, John. Should the Fanatic consider bringing Ennis in or an Ennis-esque guy? Would that rock the boat enough? Like, would you take that shot if you're running the Fanatic to say, all right, best show ever? Certainly isn't. Missanelli's going to give a stronger lead into that afternoon show now. I'm sure that's what they're going to do, right? They're just going to hope that the lead-in is better and that afternoon is going to be better, and they're going to be able to play the optics game of like, look at the amount of listeners we've taken away. Yeah. But like, if you were really trying to go for it, if you were going for the jugular, would you think about bringing Josh Ennis back and having him go take afternoons at 97.5? Would you do it?
When I worked at WIP, I was concerned that they were going to do that. Honestly, and I'm not afternoons, but I was concerned that he was going to come back to the station, and he would have had an effect. Josh is very talented, no doubt about it. He just got let go from the station in St. Louis. He was in to an afternoon drive on a rock station, and just kind of I Googled it to see if I could get more information, and there was a lot of Reddit Josh Ennis talk, and he was doing what Josh Ennis does: insult the audience, and like pretty much what he did here. Josh is very funny. If you like Josh, you like Josh. If you don't like Josh, you probably don't like Josh. I think the biggest problem with bringing him in, with Missanelli, that ain't gonna work. Having Mike in the building with Josh, it's not gonna work. But I mean, is he entertaining? Yeah, he's entertaining. Will he bring ears to the station? Yes. I think the biggest issue with Josh was he's not advertiser friendly. He didn't do well with advertisers. He didn't kiss advertisers' asses. And that's really what pays the bills. I don't know if the Fanatic actually worries as much about the ratings as they do. Hey, how is this show billing? How is this personality billing? So Josh doesn't have the track record of doing that. So, but I mean, I'd be tempted to do that for sure.
So let's go to the guy that you used to work with. And this has been a lot of radio chat. I told you we're going to do a bunch of other things, but now,
guess not.
We've gone, we can. But Missanelli came back. And I actually think it kind of speaks to the fact that, again, like the Fanatic hadn't cultivated the youth movement, right, to have somebody ready. I expect him to pull a good rating. I think that Giglio and Hugh do a nice show in middays, but I do expect Missanelli to take some listeners. If you had to project a year from now, let's assume that Mike is locked in. Mike feels good about doing middays. He and Tyrone don't see each other except for the 10-minute crossover or whatever. I say that mostly joking, but like, I can't imagine that they're on each other's Christmas card list, given how things ended there. A year from now, if all of the lead-ins, all of the afternoons, everything stays the same, is Mike Missanelli winning middays at this time, August of 2025?
And remember, Bill Colarulo also is the co-host on the show as well. And Bill is really, really talented and a great guy and really doesn't have a lot of experience in this business. So look out once he does get some experience because he's really, really good. But you're right. Like it comes down to Mike and what version of Mike are we getting? Are we getting angry politics Mike that can't stop talking about Trump or can't stop fighting with people or blocking people with Trump? Are we talking about Mike that stays away from that on the airways but continues to tweet it or whatever? I mean, I think the reality is that it's going to be a good show because Mike's always been my favorite sports radio host in the city, dating back to the 90s when he worked with Steve Fredericks, even before that, when he used to go on with Angelo or the Great Sports Debate. I've always been a big fan of Mike. At this point, I don't think that he's going to be able to beat WIP. Not even less to do with the lead in, because when you're working middays and you come on at 10 o'clock and the show that, and this is, I'm not taking a shot at John Kincaid or Andrew Chalchunas at all. I'm just giving the facts. When your competition has like over 3 times of a higher audience, that means that those people are listening to the station, and they would have to physically turn you off.
Yep.
And turn on Mike Missanelli. Now, they did that when Mike was on the other station. Mike won when he didn't even have a local lead-in on AM. We were coming out of, I think it was the Mike Tirico and Scott Van Pelt show on ESPN radio. So you talk about hey, it's 3, then it was actually 3 o'clock. We were on 3 to 7. But hey, I forgot it's 3:05. Mike's on. And then you got to turn the dial. But like also, you do have people will forget, like, oh, is it already 2 o'clock? Oh, so for Mike, it might be like it's 10:15, and people are like, oh, let me turn on Mike. So you're missing a lot of the 10 o'clock hour. So that's a long way of saying that your lead-in matters a lot.
Yeah,
that will hurt him. I also think with Mike, he's reached the point where he's alienated a large portion of his audience. People may disagree with his politics, or he may disagree with their politics. There's a segment of his audience that's like, no, F you, I'll never listen to him. And then there's other guys that say like, all right, well, I disagree with his politics, but as long as he doesn't bring it up on the air, I don't really care. Right? So like, even if he doesn't talk about it, he has turned a lot of people off based on the politics stuff before. Now, can they forget about it, and can they come back to him? Sure. But I think that a lot of people have already moved on from Mike. Listen, I think Midday's ratings was a 13 share or something like that in the spring book, and Midday's was 3.1. It was the lowest. It was the lowest on there. So Michael obviously increased that, and probably a lot. It'll be a competitive race. A year from now, I don't believe Mike will be winning Middays.
It's an interesting take. It's very interesting. I think it's interesting. I think that there is a little bit of the absence makes the heart grow fonder. I will say, like, I did not enjoy the end of Mike's run, right? Because it was just a lot of political shit that I just don't listen to sports talk radio for. And there was a whole lot of, there was tension, there was infighting, there was the thrown headphones thing. Like, you could just tell that, like, not everybody was on the same page with the show when he went to leave, when he had like the evil Mike goatee, right? Like, there was goatee Mike, right?
Evil Mike
it was,
goatee.
it wasn't, what I think a lot of people had come to like and appreciate. But I will say, yesterday, I'm driving in the car, there he is in Middays, and I, for the first time in quite a while, actively turned off a podcast and put on the radio because I wanted to hear what it was going to sound like. Yep. And there is a nostalgia factor. There is. If Cataldi, for whatever reason, decided that he was going to come back, and Beasley backed up the Brinks truck, and Cataldi, for whatever reason, said, I'm going to go do mornings on the Fanatic, there would be people who would go out of their way to listen because there's a nostalgia factor. And I think it's always hard to follow a legend. I think that while I think the 97.5 afternoon show stinks, I don't think that anybody could have gone into that job and done a sensational job or could have filled Mike's shoes, right? I think Chalchunas was put in a really rough spot when Gargano left and things kind of fell apart because of PHLY and Beasley and poaching and all that. I think he was put in a really hard spot. I would say of all the people at that station, I'm the happiest for him that he ended up getting himself into a morning spot and that, like, he's on the ticker, right? Like, he's a significant part of that show. He managed to, like, weather a very difficult storm. So kudos to him. But I think following a legend's rough. And I will say, like, I think that your former co-hosts struggled without you there. I think they needed a third voice. Some people like Spike a lot, some don't. This is just how media works. But, like, it's hard. There is a void. When a void is created, when a host walks away, the show is going to be different, and it's just kind of is what it is. So when the opportunity comes back, something like Mike returning to the Fanatic when you thought it was never going to happen, people are going to tune in. I'll be interested to see what the ratings book looks like in Eagles season, right? Because you assume WIP is going to have the lion's share, but it is interesting. And all of a sudden the Fanatic has a little bit of something going on. Like
they also have to get the word out. They have to get the word out, like you had said earlier, that he went viral. I'll guarantee you we think that everybody knows everything because we work in media. So we know everything that's happening. you're in the middle of summer, people on vacation. Not everybody's monitoring Crossing Broad and Twitter and everything else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't even know he's back. My neighbor who listened to me religiously on WIP is a big sports fan. I had said to him the Mike was coming back, and he's like, going back where? I'm like, he's back. He's going back. He's back on the Fanatic. And he's like, well, huh? And I'm like, yeah, he was on Monday. Yeah, he said it to him yesterday. And he's like, huh, really? There's a lot of people that don't know. So you got to get the word out. And like you said, during football season, a lot of people kind of take breaks from sports radio because either they're not baseball fans or they're tired of hearing the same crap over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's when they need to know Mike is back. So I'm with you. I'm curious to see how that fall book is going to look with him back.
And it's hard too, because he's not like, I always come back to Gargano a lot, right? But like when Gargano, the way that things ended there, and it wasn't great. And like there were things like Crossing Broad reported about, like, there an attempt to have like a content sharing thing between PHLY and the Fanatic and all that. When he left, he was put on ice legally. He was put on ice for, what was it, 5 months or so, I think, until between he left the Fanatic and when he was able to actually surface.
Yeah. He was in jail.
He was in media jail.
He was.
And I don't know if they ever really, like, I actually, because I work in this like media sphere, right? Like I know where he went. I know what he's doing. I know when he does the show. I know where it's available. But a lot of the people that I know that are, Philly sports talk listeners, maybe on more of a casual than a rabid, basis, had no idea where he went, had no idea that he surfaced somewhere. And I think it's hard. And it all comes back to the initial thing. I said, Missanelli was doing the podcast. I have no idea how many people were listening. You put yourself in a very interesting position because the shows that you do, there is a metric right in front of people, right? Like if you do a show on your own YouTube, people can see that number. I do a show, people can see the number. They don't see the podcast feed, but they can see the YouTube number. They can see the Twitter number. They can see Facebook, like all that kind of stuff. I think you've actually put yourself in quite an interesting position, right? Because it's not like it's do or die. You could choose to never talk into a microphone again, and you're totally fine. But it's an interesting medium to go into and kind of being able to be monitored. Like how successful is a show doing on each platform? Like it's an interesting thing. And again, no one, whether it's Gargano, whether it was Missanelli, none of them have figured out a way to say, we're going to get 5,000 people watching at a time. 5,000 concurrent viewers on YouTube for a local show isn't happening. It hasn't happened yet.
Well, no, because
it's hard.
Like, Anthony and Mike's audience, and probably my audience as well, is a terrestrial radio audience, right? Like I'm in my 40s, right? So as a guy that's going to the work site, driving to the work site, that normally listens to Mike or Anthony or me, is he turning on YouTube and watching PHLY on YouTube? I don't know. Yeah. Like the biggest thing for me with what PHLY needs to do is you need to be able to listen live. And I know they're working on an app and everything else, but if I'm in my car at 9:00 and I know Anthony's on, I don't know how many people are going to YouTube to listen to Anthony. You know what I mean? Like I need to feel like audio is also in play here and not just the podcast, because you can get Anthony's podcast, but listening live during drive time hours is important to me.
Yeah, and your hours after the fact when you're listening to the podcast feed too. It's tricky. It's a hard thing. We'll see. I mean, we'll see how it works. I mean, I said for a long time, I thought that the two places for you to go were PHLY, which they would be very smart to bring you on board, or 97.5, back up the Brinks truck, have you save the afternoons, but you don't want to do the afternoons and say, fuck you for not doing the right thing, like
they backed up the door. They drove the DoorDash into my driveway. There was no Brinks truck from the Fanatic. I'll say this. That like there was interest from the Fanatic. I was interested if everything was right. It wasn't right. A lot of times in life, but also in this business, it comes down to timing. People have contracts and whatever else, and it was like what they had potential interest in me to do, I had no interest at all. So the Fanatic was interested. They weren't bringing a Brinks truck, that's for sure. But I could have done the Fanatic. But you know what? Like sometimes, especially with where we are right now, I feel like that you got to bite the bullet. I got to figure out what the next thing is. I got to figure out the digital world, and I need to take my lumps. That's why I do the YouTube stuff, just so I can figure out like what's this audience? What do I need to do? Yeah. Right. So that's what's going to be the next thing. So I feel comfortable with where I'm going from here.
Good on you, man. Good on you.
Yeah.
Do you have time to get to a couple of the teams real quick? Yeah. We can do like a rapid fire. All right.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the Eagles, the first preseason game, right? John Clark goes and tweets out that Nick Sirianni expects to play the starters for a series, right? So I decide I'm going to switch up when I do my show so we can do a watch along, because I'm like, that'd be a really fun thing to do on YouTube, right? Everybody loves a good watch along. You can't have it pulled up. You can't have the audio. You get it taken down by YouTube. Fine. So we do the show, right? I got the Russ Joy Show going on a Friday. Was it Friday, Thursday, whatever day it was. I'm there at night. We're going through it. We're like talking about Embiid, having a great game against Serbia, all that. Phillies, they were on the upswing, and then it all fell apart over the weekend, all that. And then I'm like, all right, everybody, go turn on the Eagles game. Let's see how Kellen Moore's offense looks. Let's get some initial thoughts here on Jalen Hurts and how the wideouts look, how Saquon Barkley looks in the backfield, all that. And then the comments start, and everybody's like, that is definitely not Jalen Hurts. That's Kenny Pickett. And I got upset because I'm like, look, I don't expect that every reporter is going to get it right. I don't hold anything against John Clark, because John Clark said Sirianni had said he was hoping to play the starters for a series. But man, what a buzzkill. And I had the audacity to tweet something, and you could tell me I'm an idiot for it. But I said, imagine being somebody who who pays for the ticket, right? Not the season ticket holders. They're screwed. They have to pay for the tickets. But imagine you bought tickets to that game because you're like, you know what? I want to see one series of Jalen Hurts and one series of Lamar Jackson. And instead of getting any of that, you got a bunch of slop, right? You got a bunch of second, third, fourth string guys, a bunch of dudes who are never going to actually play in the NFL. I'm like, I think that kind of sucks, especially pay money for it. Where did you land? Am I an idiot for thinking that you should probably expect that maybe you get to see the starters for a single series? Am I asking for too much? Am I nuts?
You're an idiot. Yeah. You're definitely an idiot. No,
okay.
Jeff McClain, I believe, reported that they were going to play a series, the starters. So I tuned in with the expectation of that. Now they didn't.
Yeah.
I was surprised when I heard that they were going to play the starters. So, I mean,
okay.
Honestly, I think at this point, the talk about preseason, I don't need it shortened. If they want to shorten it one game, the only thing I ask is stop trying to say that the joint practices take the place of the preseason games. They get much better work in the joint practices because it's a controlled environment or whatever, right? I know that already. Starters aren't going to play in the preseason for the most part. Some teams may put them out there. Other teams may not. I can't care about it anymore, and I can't get emotional about it. But one thing that they do need to do, and Sirianni's done it this year, is you got to run a real training camp. You got to run a real training camp. You don't want to play them in preseason, fine, but having 60-minute practices and then they're home, I don't think that helped them last year. But yeah, I'm unemotional when it comes to preseason.
I just don't like the preseason. Give 2 preseason games, and if you want to go for the money grab and say that we're going to convert any preseason game that existed before outside of 2 into a regular season game, if you're going to say 2 preseason, 18 regular season, I'm fine. That's okay. Players Association will hate it, right? But figure it out. I just don't get it. I don't get the point of preseason. And here's the other thing: if you are following the Eagles, right, that battle for the 53rd spot on the roster doesn't matter, right? It really shouldn't matter. You're a Super Bowl contender. It matters if you're a bottom feeding team. It matters if you're a team that's trying to find, some wins along the margins. And you're trying to find let's say 5 guys that are undrafted players that are going to be really cheap for you for a limited time. Right. And that's when it matters. That's when those battles at the end of the roster actually matter. But it was if you're an Eagles fan and you're losing your shit week in and week out because your guy didn't make the roster, right? Because you're that dialed into the birds that you care about the 53rd spot on the roster. I don't have to tell you. Are you am I an idiot again?
I care.
Why do you care? Why?
Yes, I
Stop.
care.
Why?
I pay attention to it. Do I lose sleep over it? No, but it interests me.
Why? What? Okay.
Right.
What does it matter? Honestly, what does it matter?
Christian Ellis making the team has no bearing over, and now he's in New England. Makes no bearing over because that from last year. I mean, I don't know. I'm a football fan. Same reason why you're talking about muckers and grinders in the 4th line, and you're looking at depth down in Lehigh Valley for the Phantoms or whatever. That's what we do with the Eagles. And I
don't really care. But see, that's the thing, though. I don't even care about that, right? I'm supposed to be this hockey guy, right? I don't give a shit about the 4th line, all right? I don't like when the Flyers rush to re-sign Garnet Hathaway and they hand Paling an extension, all right? Just give me a bunch of kids. Let them play on the 4th line. I don't care. I genuinely don't care.
Touche. But also the extended practice squad that you can bump them up to on Sundays to where they're not like that. Totally even takes
Yeah.
out of the 53-man roster. I mean, they really have like a 60-man roster when you think
Yeah.
about it. These guys are up playing anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How do you feel about the by the way, the we mentioned this earlier, but like the charting of reps in training camp?
Love
You
it.
actually like that?
Yes, I give Elliott Short Parks more credit, and I'm telling you, there's not a bigger fan of Elliott out there than me. All you idiots out there that just want to kill him and criticize him. Everybody in the NFL, all the reporters now, do you know what they do? As I told you, I listen to a lot of local sports radio. You know what they do now?
What do they do?
They chart the plays. They'll give, he was 12 for 16 yesterday with an interception. I heard Andrew Callahan of the Boston Herald say it today on Boston Sports Radio. He went to it a couple times. Stats from practice. That wasn't done before Elliott. Elliott's an innovator, and he started doing this. Everybody made fun of him for years. Now everybody does it in all these football cities. So I love it. I love it.
It is genuinely insane. Like if we get to a point where there's like an ESP cosplayer who like goes and covers the Sixers and we start finding out how many threes Tyrese Maxey made, I'm going to lose my shit. I don't need that. At least I don't. Maybe I'm crazy.
You young people out there trying to get into the media, Russ just gave you a good idea. Become the Elliott of the Sixers and chart practice shots.
And you know what? I'll tell you what, you can go do that. You can get a big social media following. You could be really good with video. You could even have a podcast and be good at it. And guess what? The station that owns the rights, they still won't give a shit. They'll talk about the Eagles worse. And the last thing, let's talk about the Phillies really quickly here because they've been as Jekyll and Hyde, as up and down as it can be. I feel like every time I go to do a show, I'm like, all right, Phillies are starting to pull their heads out of their collective ass. Things are going well. I said a couple weeks ago, like right before the deadline, make a move, Dave Dombrowski. Like you pushed all the chips in. You spent a lot of money on this team. There are still holes, bullpen, rotation. I continue to just be like, what the fuck? Like you are so screwed if Zach Wheeler gets hurt, if Suarez gets hurt, if Christopher Sanchez regresses to the mean, which is what happened in his last start. Nola's a head case. Like you had those spots. I wanted to see an everyday, like maybe even an impact bat, whether it was in the outfield or first base, and send Bryce back out to the outfield for 2 months here, even if it's on a short-term deal. Somebody like do something. They did get Estevez, which is great. They got Hayes, who they have tried to sell people on being an everyday guy. Yeah. But like, man, it's 3-game stretch, 4-game stretch. It is, they look like the team that was the best in baseball. And then they look like, holy shit, it's going to happen again. They're going to get to the fall. The bats are going to get cold. The pitching is going to not be able to have, 4 potential top ERA guys in the National League going into the postseason. I feel like I'm insane half the time because I try not to get hyperbolic, but I'm like very up and down with them. You do out of the parks with Jon Marks. You care about the Phillies. Have you felt like you're insane half the time?
Yeah, the problem is we have an NFL Eagles mentality when it comes to baseball and the Phillies. That's 162 games. So there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be ebbs and flows. And if you're a Phillies fan and you're trying to remain sane right now, you tell yourself this is just the down. Mm-hmm. The ebbs and the flows, this is the period of time where it's after the trade deadline. You're in August, guys are getting a little bit tired, and this is where they need to be like, all right, like you said, get your head out of your ass and let's go. So that's where you hope they are right now. Their starting pitching hasn't been as great. The bullpen has started to leak a little bit. Alvarado's been horrible. For the most part, I don't really know what else you could have done at the trade deadline. I'm fine with what Dave Dombrowski did at the trade deadline. Gave up 2 really good-looking young arms to get a closer in here. You just hope that it matters once the postseason starts. But this is I admitted for the first time last week, that for the first time it's crept into my head and I was ready to say it out loud, that I'm worried that the Phillies have already played their best baseball. Wouldn't be the
peaked
first
early.
time. Yeah, I mean, wouldn't be the first time in name your sport that a team played really, really well and then they kind of ran out of steam, injuries. It's hard to play at a level the Phillies were playing the entire season. It's hard to have the starting pitching and the bullpen. Jesus Christ, they've 4 starting pitchers in the All-Star game or 3 starting pitchers in the All-Star game and 2 bullpen arms with 5 pitchers at All-Stars this year. It's tough to do for a whole season. I think this is coming down to their top 3 starters and their stars. What does Bryce Harper do in the playoffs? What does Kyle Schwarber do in the playoffs? You know what happens when these guys aren't hitting home runs? They don't score runs. Yeah. When Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper and Nick Castellanos are hitting home runs, this team's normally winning. Which is to your point, and it was always the thing I'd say about the Phillies back when they had Howard and Utley and all those guys. When you live with the long ball, you die with the long ball. And now you're playing in October, and now it's 35 degrees out because you're playing in a Northeast city. It's not as easy to smash those home runs everywhere. So it's complicated. It's baseball. And the Phillies have done enough to where they're going to make the playoffs. I'm almost positive they're going to win the division. And you just got to hope that once the playoffs start, they're able to kind of find their mojo again.
It also kind of hurts, I guess, that like your Stotts and your Marshes of the world, who had been like able to give you big hit after big hit, especially like late in last season, they just haven't been able to find the consistency thus far. And like maybe they will. Like maybe those guys will be able to step it up late September into October, and they're going to be the ones that are going to manufacture runs. Like maybe it'll happen. The funny thing is, Castellanos to me, when I think of him, it's not even like, imagine unlocking Nick Castellanos. It's like, imagine you could just get 3 good games in a series with Nick Castellanos where he hits for average or he gives you a few extra base hits. I don't need him to hit home runs. I just need him to get on base, right? Like I need him to have competitive at bats. I need him to like actually look like some version of what the Phillies thought they were going to get. He to me is almost like end of career Pat Burrell, where it's like he could go on a stretch where he's crushing, he's making great contact, he's getting the barrel on the ball for 10 games. But then he goes cold for 2 weeks at a time. You have to hope that all of these guys are able to be something near 85% of what you expect of them going into the playoffs, right? Like Harper to me, maybe it's just me. There have been some real stretches here where I've been concerned about him. Not that I think he's not an MVP kind of guy. Not that I think that he's
been great
that he's had his like best days are far behind him, but like he has disappeared. And like, I'll go back to the Yankees series, right? Like, and in that time, he was a total no-show. He was a total non-factor. The at-bats were bad. Some people like to get caught up in the, he's not busting it out of the box. He's had a few times in recent weeks where like weird things happen in the field. You don't run it out and you're a young player, you're benched. You don't run it out and you're Bryce Harper. It's okay. There are times where I've been like, he doesn't look like himself. I wonder if he's hurt, like, weird things happen in baseball. Guys try to play through stuff. There are times that I legitimately feel like he's not fully healthy, or he's not healthy enough to give you what you expect.
The Yankees, he almost looked spooked in the Yankee series. Yeah. A couple times where he either struck out or he grounded out, and they went to him, and he kind of looked like, man, what do I have to do? What do we have to do here? Remember, they were playing the Yankees at Citizens Bank Park. Bryce is he likes he was a Cowboy fan. He likes the Yankees, likes Ohio State. He likes Duke in basketball. He's a front runner, right? So that's a big series for him. He's got the Yankees coming in, Aaron Judge, who's been and like the Phillies weren't ready for the Yankees in that series. And Bryce looked pathetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a potential World Series matchup. The Yankees showed up for that series, right? Like
he looked spooked.
He did.
So when
you have to hope he meets the moment.
When you look at the Phillies, they have the Marlins, they have the Nationals, they have the Braves, and the Braves right now I don't believe are in the playoffs. So they have they have some easy series. The Royals after that. The Astros haven't been great this year. So they're going to have a little bit of a soft schedule coming up here. You still have the Marlins. They recently fired their GM, or the GM fired everybody in the front office. So like they're not going to have a tough schedule. I mean, just the Phillies are going to beat up on the bad teams, and that's one of the problems we had with them previously was, well, they lose to the bad teams. This particular version of the team last year and this year beat the crap out of these bad teams. Mm-hmm. So I think they'll get close to 100 just beating up on the teams that they should. But listen, they're going to need to look differently than they do right now once the playoffs start, because they'll lose, and they'll lose quick.
And I've said it a bunch of times here. Like there has to be real concern. Like I know that the Marlins are bad. I know that the Nationals are bad. But because the Phillies weren't able to ever really put their foot on the Braves' throat, and they weren't able to put their foot on the Mets' throat, you do still have two teams that, while it's not the most realistic thing in the world, they're going to catch up and they're going to pass you. You do run the risk that, like, if the Nationals and Marlins series don't go the way that they should, the Braves could come in here 4 games back, and then all of a sudden you're really running a risk of something going sideways, I hope they can show some killer instinct. That to me is like what I'm looking for the next 2 weeks. If you can show that you have the killer instinct, and that maybe you were kind of resting on your laurels, maybe you were kind of going through the motions here out of the All-Star break, show us that you are that team. You don't have to be the historic pace team from before the break. Show us that you are the best team in the National League, one of the 3 best teams in baseball. Just show us some flashes to kind of put everyone's mind at ease. Is that too much to ask for?
No,
Is that
not
too much?
at all.
John, I want to thank you for hopping on the show today. I know that we went probably longer than you might have expected. We certainly went longer on the radio stuff than I think either of us expected. But that is the beauty of this show. We just kind of go off on tangents. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes the conversation goes ways that we don't expect. But I do want to thank you for being here. Plug everywhere and anything that people can find you at right now. Take this opportunity. It's a massive one.
Follow me at Jon Marks Media. That's on all platforms. And that's subscribe on YouTube as well. I will have, I've been saying this for a while, I will have hopefully an announcement on what I'll be doing once football season starts, and maybe like right before football season, I'll be wading into something new. So look for an announcement coming up on that sometime soon.
A nice tease to end the show.
Yes, sir.
I love it.
Thanks, Russ.
All right. Big thank you to everybody who tuned into the show. You can find this show on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts as well. I'll be back next week with a new episode here of the Russ Joy Show. Big thank you to Jon Marks. And I will talk to all of you next time here on the Russ Joy Show.